Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. It is our April webinar, and we're joined by a tremendous group of panelists today. I want to thank everybody in advance again for making the time. Our topic today is future-proofing real assets, this convergence of efficiency and resilience in the built environment, but I think more broadly in the consciousness, this understanding of sustainability and resilience growing together. We have a great program for you today, but before we get into it, as always, want to thank our sponsors, the LA Department of Water and Power and Southern California Gas. It's over our 10th year as a program, and it's thanks to their support we're able to put this on and do the rest of what we do. So thank you to SoCal Gas and LADWP. Housekeeping items, as usual, we'll keep the lines muted, the attendee lines muted. Please do submit questions. We're going to try to save plenty of time. Today's format is going to be very conversational, almost like a live podcast style discussion with our panelists. So please do submit your questions through the chat, and we'll make sure we get through as many of those as we can in the time today. At the end, we do have a few slides, which we'll distribute along with the recording of the discussion, and always welcome your feedback. We're always looking to improve or hear what we did well. Hey, that speaker was great, get them back again. So please do give us that feedback. In terms of agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about the language of ESG, and ESG is the kind of new term, environmental social governance, for those that are maybe less familiar with that. Sustainability continues to evolve. This languaging continues to evolve, and that's really part of what we're going to explore today, not just the language, but also the projects and the infrastructure and where that all comes together in reporting frameworks that help drive investment, right? Have a great discussion and opportunities for you all to chime in and hear other ways that you can get involved with LABBC, with GRESB, with the resilience work the city's doing, and with DWP, of course. My name is Dave Hodgins. For those that don't know me, I'm Executive Director of the LABBC. I'll be joined today by my colleague Madhavi Komar. She's our Senior Community Marketing Manager, because again, what we're talking about here is languaging and concepts, and how do we guide a productive conversation. Wanted to bring her in as well to help ask some of the questions and participate. So thanks, Madhavi, for jumping in today. So let's get into it. The language of ESG. So sustainability. According to the UN, and I really like this definition, it's meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs, right? And I think we have a quote, I'd like to end with a quote that we're not building on the accomplishments, or we're not inheriting the planet from our ancestors, we're borrowing it from our children. I think that's a really nice way of thinking about it. And this is, Madhavi, does this kind of resonate with you, or is this kind of how you think about it?
Yeah, most definitely. And, I should preface this by coming in and saying I do have extensive experience in commercial real estate, but I'm particularly new to ESG. And, it's very interesting to see kind of how certain words and terms in this field take on a different lens than maybe what I previously would have associated with the definition. And, part of the reason why I did get into this work was that whole idea of, we're borrowing, our planet and our world from our children. I have two small children, and, I started thinking a lot about what their adult life would look like, and the responsibility of improving our world really weighed heavy. So, how could I get involved? How can I make an impact? And that's really what led me here.
And then resilience, and we cribbed this one from you guys, Dan, at GRESB. We really like the way that you guys have defined this, and that's the capacity of companies and funds to survive and thrive in the face of social and environmental shocks and stressors. And I'm sure we'll get into that. But I think this is a really nice, crisp definition, especially for our purposes today. Madhavi, when you hear the word resilience, kind of what comes up for you? Again, as someone that's new to this space,
So
but comes from real estate. Mm-hmm.
yeah, so resilience to me, you know, I I know I bring up my kids a lot, but like, I see my toddler fall down and she gets up so quickly and cries for, 10 minutes, but 5 minutes later, it's like it never happened. And to me, that really forms my concept of resilience. Also, I come from parents who are immigrants and seeing them kind of rise against um, what they had to go through to provide a better life for us. That's kind of where I see resilience. Interestingly enough, like I speaking of words, I looked up resilience and vulnerability because I do think the two tie hand in hand in some respect, and their definition is kind of like complete opposite. But I think there you have to, we're in a vulnerable position right now, as a planet, as a society. There's lots of components here. And I think that vulnerability is going to define also our resilience. So in the form of ESG, that's how I'm kind of wrapping my head around it.
And that's an interesting point, and that human aspect, and then convergence to tend to a common result, a common conclusion, and I think that's what we see happening. And we at LABBC, really what we're trying to do is highlight the leaders and use those examples to accelerate the broader market, right? And I think that language is an important part of that. And picking up on this idea of resilience, I think is an interesting sort of, for lack of a better term, bipartisan issue, right? We can talk about resilience, and everybody agrees, regardless of what we think about climate or the causes of that. Hardening infrastructure, grid reliability. These are smart things to do. And so as these things come together, I think in a sense, hopefully it makes the value proposition clear that they are not one or the other, but maybe that's something we can explore. And Dan, maybe you've seen this in some of your work, what resonates, with folks. So with that framing out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the discussion. Unfortunately, Adam from Heinz just let us know he's not able to join today. He's got a young baby at home, and I think something has come up at the last minute. So we are fortunate to be joined by a very distinguished panel. So Madhavi, I'll let you take over from here and get into the panel. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Dave. Kind of kicking off how we went through sustainability and resilience and convergence. As you introduce yourself, can you speak to ways you see sustainability and resilience converging in your work? We'll start with Dan.
Sure. Hi, my name is Dan Winters. I'm head of Americas with GRESB. And I just want to say this has been a great start to a webinar. I often talk about the language of sustainability. When we talk about the building labels, we're talking about LEED, but if you parse LEED apart, whether it's LEED or BREEAM or whatever that label is, you pull it apart and it's a language, right? There's a language of energy efficiency and water efficiency and location, and it all boils down to credits. Same thing with GRESB. What GRESB is, it's a portfolio level assessment. And David brought up the idea of sustainability and ESG being sort of morphing together. So sustainability is what we talk about when we're thinking about real estate and assets and communities and things on the ground. ESG is a construct of the capital markets. That's how these things are intertwining. So from our perspective, what we do at GRESB is we benchmark the global industry when it comes to sustainability best practices. And then we give that data access to the capital markets who put it in an ESG wrapper. So, they're all kind of the same, they're coming together. But what we do at GRESB is we have a tailored approach for institutional real estate that is used around the world. And it's an annual assessment where organizations get in there and they follow these best practices and they benchmark themselves against peers. So when it comes to resilience, one of the things that we do is we offer up modules to the global industry. Our first module 4 years ago was health and well-being, and the last one was resilience. So resilience becomes a thing. We offer it out there and we ask, is anybody thinking about this? Not just at the asset level, but from a company's systematic approach. And then that's what happens the first year. The second year, we refine it. The third year, we score it. And this year was the year that we incorporated this into all of the different aspects and attributes that make up the global GRESB assessment. So how did I do with your question? Did I answer it appropriately? Because I want to stop here and give others a chance.
I think you did. I think it was a very great answer. A key thing that I heard from a word that you used was best practice, and that this is a practice. And what it sounds like, you know, the module really develops that practice year to year from what I heard you saying. So really interesting. And we'd like to move on to Aaron and see how, you know, sustainability and resilience converge in your work.
Great, thank you so much. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for allowing me to participate in this conversation. My name is Aaron Gross. I'm the Chief Resilience Officer for the City of Los Angeles. I base out of the Office of Public Safety in Mayor Eric Garcetti's office. And my role is to implement the Resilient LA strategy, which is a really large book that has a bunch of different chapters, but really 96 goals for the city to become more resilient, to, as in the definitions we talked about earlier, to help protect against shocks or stress that may present themselves to the city of Los Angeles. And those shocks or stresses can be acute, like an earthquake, or gradual, like climate change. They can be natural, like a wildfire. They can be human-made, like air pollution. And so it's really, resilience is really broad. And so, especially in the city of Los Angeles, where we have not only diversity in population, but diversity in geography, it's a huge challenge. And while a lot of times when people think about resilience, and in truth, a lot of my job is public safety and emergency preparedness, it really goes well beyond that to healthy communities and good housing and, you know, healthy water, clean air. But where resilience and sustainability converge is really also broad. There's a lot of overlap between resilience and sustainability, especially when we talk about climate change and urban heat. The work that the city is doing towards trying to localize our water and localize our power is really important. The fact that we bring our water into the city from far away, and that a lot of our energy is generated from far away, is a bit of a challenge, especially in earthquake country, or in a city that just recently was ranked by FEMA as the most risky population in the country. And that comes from not only that diversity in geography, but that diversity in population, the amount of risk, the amount of vulnerability of our population. And so we are looking for ways to both adapt and mitigate to all of these shocks and stresses. And when it comes to specifically climate change or urban heat, you know, we look to those opportunities to maybe make water more local. So if the earth shakes, we still have the ability to feed water to the public. And if if there are fires and they bring our electricity down, that we have the ability to continue to provide electricity from more local sources. When it comes to urban heat, we look at ways to mitigate or adapt by providing shade, or providing hydration stations, or providing more trees, so we can cool off the city in a way that the planet is making harder to do. So there is a tremendous amount of overlap between resilience and sustainability, and it really comes down to a lens by which we're trying to do everything that the city does. And these aren't the only two, right? We're looking to everything that we do in the city, we hope will have a more sustainable look. We hope that we think about the resilience. We hope we think about efficiency and about equity. And these are all components that fit into both sustainability and definitely into resilience.
You raised a few points that I want to circle back to after we get through the rest of the introductions that I think apply to the panel. But I do want to move on to David and introduce him and get his answer to how he sees sustainability and resilience convergent in his work as well.
Sure, thank you. Thanks, everybody. Pleasure to be here. Thanks to Dave and his staff for putting on another excellent webinar. I'm David Jaco, Director of Efficiency Solutions for the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. We serve the city of Los Angeles and a few other communities, specifically up in the Eastern Sierra. I wanted to talk a little bit about sustainability first. I really appreciate the UN definition. It's very succinct, but it's also very broad. So I wanted to do a little bit of a drill down in my thinking about specifically for us as a utility. There's two main components that come to mind in sustainability, the resource side and the waste stream side. So sustainable use of resources means you're not using the resources faster than they can regenerate themselves. And on the waste stream side, you're not producing more waste than the environment can process in real time. And so we're failing on both fronts. Primarily, especially on the transportation side, we're driven by fossil fuels. Those took millions of years to generate, and we're burning through them at a very fast pace. And on the waste stream side, we're pumping more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere than can be reabsorbed. So, and those fit in, of course, with the utility as well. We've undertaken a study called LA100 in partnership with National Renewable Energy Laboratory out of Golden, Colorado, to look at how we can feasibly get to a zero carbon grid. And we actually have a plan for 2035 to achieve that. It incorporates a lot of renewables. Now, here's where we get into the resiliency side of things. Aaron covered a lot of ground, and from the city's perspective, there's millions of dimensions, frankly, to these topics. But for us as a utility, resilience is our primary mission is safe, affordable, reliable electricity and water. Specific to electricity, there's a fundamental tension for us between going towards renewables and maintaining resiliency. It's not, and we'll work through it, but there is a little bit of a tension when you look at the intermittency issue with renewable power. The sun doesn't shine at night, the wind doesn't always blow, but yet we have to make sure we have reliable power supply. And so that's we have to balance those two. It definitely is a balancing act for us as a utility. But we have, and I'll talk a little bit more later on this, but we have a number of strategies that both us and our customers can adopt to help us with both the sustainability and the resilience side of the coin.
Thank you so much. And not to put you on the spot, Dave, but I'd also like to, see how you see sustainability and resilience, converging in the work that you're doing with LABBC as well.
Sure, absolutely. It wouldn't be fair if I didn't try to answer my own question. I've always seen this as two sides of the same coin. And for me, the way I think about the languaging is what's going to get folks' attention, right? And as market conditions change, as our environment kind of shifts around us, how do we remain relevant and top of mind for folks? And so I look at what's going to open the door for the deepest opportunities to move the needle, both on resilience and sustainability. They go really hand in hand, and I think we'll get into more of that today. But as for example, where can we take advantage of opportunities created by seismic upgrades, for example, to use that as an opportunity to get efficiency done? Similar logic. So where can we use resilience to create an opening to achieve multiple benefits? And that's really how we've been approaching it and talking about it. So it's great to see the way that this is making its way now into the fabric of GRESB, and as David mentioned, there's this this tension that exists, but it's a healthy one, as this transition, this decarbonization is occurring, and we can solve this together. I think that's another aspect of resilience is that teamwork piece, because no one can do it alone. The private sector, the public sector, neither can get there on its own. It has to be done together. So I think that's a nice place to segue into just the more formal discussion. So with that, I will stop sharing so we don't have the distraction of slides, and everyone should just now see the gallery view, and we can get into more of the follow-up discussion.
Great, thank you so much. So taking some of what was said in the introductory questions, and looping this back to my role as a marketing manager for LABBC, so much of marketing is based in words. And right now with Earth Day coming around the corner, and we're seeing a lot of trending hashtags, social media, all of this sort of sustainability as an April discussion point. And David, you kind of touched on this, the balancing act, pursuing both sustainability and resiliency is a balancing act. How can we think about that? And how can we balance the shift of this trending conversation past the near term, past April? How can we get people engaged? What language motivates this past a trend?
Mm-hmm. I think one thing is current events have elevated this discussion to a broader audience than I think we've typically been used to. And when I say current events, I mean things like the heat storm we had last summer that resulted in rolling blackouts in California, the wildfires, and then the Texas deep freeze, and the complete lack of preparedness that Texas utilities, due to their regulatory or regime or lack thereof, were just completely caught off guard. So, I think those types of things, people seeing it actually experiencing the impacts. We can talk about the future all we want, but until folks start actually living it, it's hard to get attention. I think we're kind of probably past the tipping point now. In that we're going to see more and more. We're going to see more and more of these types of extreme weather events and the stresses that they put on our infrastructure. And I think we have to, it's unfortunate that that's happening and that we're probably past that tipping point, but we need to take advantage of those opportunities to drive the messaging every single time. And unfortunately, we're going to have more and more of those opportunities, I think.
Does anyone else have anything to add there?
May I? So, from our perspective, we marshal the money, and we've got institutional investors that are very keen to understand hidden risks in their portfolio with resilience, climate change. Basically there's physical risk and there's transition risk. So this conversation has really elevated, particularly over the past 2 years. We've gone from climate change is the thing, I don't know, in this country, to resilience. And boy, that switch flipped pretty quick. That was sort of a 2019, 2020, and we were right there with our resilience module asking these questions. So for us, it comes down to having a company or a portfolio manager of a big institutional real estate fund or firm think about, well, is somebody in charge? Is somebody thinking about this issue, particularly at financial moments of truth, right? So if you're buying a building, what sort of underwriting are you doing? And are you incorporating these issues into your future cash flow projections, into CapEx potential? Just sort of, where's your brain when it comes to this? So assuming that somebody's in charge and thinking about it, it's not just a building by building, but it's more of a systematic portfolio experience that we're trying to stimulate. So that's the systematic process. We want to assess exposure, which is basically if you have some really big bulky assets, think Wilshire Boulevard or downtown, right? What is the financial exposure to a major portfolio? And then what are you going to do about it? So by having institutional investors ask these questions of the people who are in charge of these assets is really powerful. It moves things along And that conversation did shift tremendously over the past, I'd call it 24 months.
That's oh, sorry, go ahead, Aaron.
No, go ahead.
I'll come back to it. You could go ahead.
Okay. I was just gonna say, I think it's important as Dan and as the other Daves were saying, that to talk about these things in context, to talk about the cost is really important. I think that oftentimes, especially from a government perspective, we look at implementing rules and regulations, which are necessary. But when we're talking to the business community, oftentimes it's easier or more appropriate or more effective to talk about money when we're talking about money. So if somebody is going to incur a cost to minimize their risk or minimize potential damage, I guess that's the same thing as risk. But if they're going to be talking about that at a time when they're talking about buying the building or upgrading the building, then I think you can build it into the future. You can build it into your future costs. One of the main concepts of resilience is looking into the future and and having a longer range view about how you want to affect your business, your customers, your employees, that sort of thing. And so, especially as Dave mentioned, when we're talking about seismic risk, there are ways to minimize your seismic risk. In fact, right now, at this exact same time, there's another seminar going on with the business community talking about seismic work and how that is intersecting with sustainability as well, from a kind of a more business perspective. But it's the same discussion. It is about how, when we're looking to invest to protect our business, our customers, our future, how can we do that in a way that we're efficient with our money to make sure that we're protecting against whatever shock or stress may present itself. And along those lines, I also want to mention that we're not always talking necessarily about expensive ways. There are many expensive ways to be more resilient and more sustainable, but there are also less expensive ways to be resilient and sustainable. And businesses hopefully are looking at all of those. And I'm happy to give examples of the less expensive versus the more expensive, but there are so many different ways that businesses can think about how they can protect their businesses, their customers, their employees. That there's a lot of different ways to help manage the challenges.
That's very interesting, because I think a lot of people think of sustainability and ESG as this huge, large concept where it's all or nothing, and it really doesn't have to be. Going back to some of the points that Dan mentioned about financial underwriting on capital markets assets. I know typically there's like a 10-year look that they usually do when selling an asset. And looking back at the potential cost savings and appeal to income versus operational income. Do you see that really driving a lot of the investors now for like that 10-year kind of projection? How has that kind of been integrated into maybe what you're doing now with the GRESB modules? I did see that there was like a cost for it, but it's very minimal compared to the potential savings down the line. LABBC just published a blog on this, and there's more information in there, and I think we'll share the link in the chat. But going back to kind of the new integrations, the management component and the leadership component as indicators, can you kind of speak to that and how that's been received and kind of what you're seeing on the institutional side?
Sure. So what we do is we elevate the issue and we ask the question, is this something that people are thinking about? Because it takes everybody, right? Aaron was talking about, he's responsible for the entire community, and people are thinking about their asset. So that automatically creates this difference of viewpoints. So what we're trying to do is marshal everybody to be thinking about these things, elevate best practices, and hopefully have them applied writ large. Now, the 10-year payback, sure, that's what people do when they're running their Argus model. to when they're making the financial projections, and all of those things have to work. But generally in there are, moments for CapEx, there's equipment that changes, there's lease turnover. So these are other moments where if you identify that there's an opportunity to improve the asset from a resilience standpoint, you want to know that in advance and think about that when you're underwriting it and plan for it. So we don't, GRESB receives 100,000 assets globally within the submissions that show up. Last year, there were 1,230 responses. Some of these come from really, really large funds, $30 billion in gross asset value. Others are small groups. Either way, by asking the question, because GRESB is an annual assessment, we issue a score. What we watch people, just like we all have since kindergarten, you get a score. And what do? You want to get that score better, right? Even if you score in the 80s or 90s, you want to ace the exam. So we traffic in a score that's driven by peers. And I like to say that we create this competitive race to the top. So by having the resilience module there, we put the management teams that fill this out through the paces, ask them 10 questions, and get them to think about these things. And in a wash, rinse, repeat sort of way, the next year they do it again. They want to get answers where there were no, they want to get them the yes, they want to get some points, and now they're thinking. And so they're looking at their portfolio and saying, oh, these buildings are doing great. There's some really good things happening here. How can we systematically apply those concepts across not just our assets in LA, but maybe our assets in Denver, maybe our assets in Florida? Different conditions, same kind of thinking is required. So how's that? Can we build on that?
Yes, we actually can. Thank you.
That's great. And we are going to be diving further into this topic of sustainability and resilience in the due diligence process in our July webinar. So I'm really looking forward to that. I think it's a super important topic, because the business plan that the asset manager inherits, right, can be handcuff them a little bit in terms of what's possible. And so how can we open up as much opportunity there? And I think that the work you guys have done at GRESB is really guiding people towards thinking about that. Okay, what are our processes? What are the results that we're creating, and where do we need to shift or improve communication to give ourselves that flexibility we need to really execute in this new environment, right? So I'm really looking forward to that conversation. Sorry to knock you off, Madhavi. There you go.
Oh, no, it's fine. Well, because, going back to what you were saying about the CapEx and operating expenses, this is a great segue to David about the utility perspective. What can building owners do to further efficiency efforts while also, contributing to grid resilience, like we saw on the rolling blackouts and this summer? Like it's probably just going to get a little hotter this summer, and we'll probably see some more of that. Or the wildfires where people were out of power, out of Southern California. Sorry, that was a little hard to come out. And Northern California, like it's kind of all across the board, and affects a large region. So what can we see there?
Oh yeah, thanks. And to build on what Dan was saying, one way to think of it is insurance, and then doing things, building in resilience to lower your insurance premiums. And I think everybody has insurance, hopefully, in terms of buildings, and they mitigate risk of various things that could happen, fires, et cetera. Using the seismic example, you can get seismic insurance, earthquake insurance, but if you do a seismic retrofit, you can get a discount on your insurance. And so that interplay right there is kind of how we're thinking about this from the customer standpoint. I really appreciate what Aaron said, that there's expensive ways to do resiliency, but there's also inexpensive ways. And that's a great segue to energy efficiency. Energy efficiency is first in the loading order in California to meet new load, take that to the customer level, and energy efficiency helps the customer save money. And so it's an upfront investment that pays for itself over time. And we as a utility strongly encourage our customers. We have an extensive portfolio of rebates and incentives and technical assistance to help our customers adopt energy efficiency and hopefully deep energy efficiency. One thing I wanted to talk about with energy efficiency as a resource and how it can really support resiliency, I have to back up a little bit to tell you how the utility is dealing with the intermittency issue of renewables, and that's through storage, energy storage, lots of storage, both at the utility level and the customer level. At the utility level, it helps us provide a more resilient power stream, mitigates the intermittency, the wind and the sun. At the customer level, it can provide the ability, if they have enough storage, to island, like through a microgrid, meaning if the power goes off, they have enough battery storage on site to run essential, or perhaps the entire facility. And so that can get a little expensive. And this is where energy efficiency comes in, both at the utility scale and the customer scale, to mitigate that expense. So we see, we have a huge peak of solar generation in the afternoon, and it's getting to where it exceeds the load on the grid, on the whole grid, unless it's summer when it's really hot and all the ACs are running. This time of year and 6 months from now in the fall, which will be the same, same sunlight levels and pretty much the same climate conditions, we often have more solar than we can use. So right now, what are we doing with it? We're paying other states to take it, or we're just running it to ground. That obviously is not sustainable either. So we need tremendous amounts of storage. Here's where energy efficiency at the utility scale comes in. Right now, we've got too much generation. So one could say, well, we don't need energy efficiency right now. Well, we need storage. And once you have that level of utility scale storage, you're going to want all the energy efficiency you can get, so you can store more of all that excess, that quote excess solar generation, and then use it at night. So you're storing it during the day. Energy efficiency will let you store more. Now, energy efficiency at night is also important, because the more energy efficiency you have 24/7, including at night, the less you need to store to make it through the night. So it's a 24/7 benefit to energy efficiency, regardless of what the times of usage are, and regardless of what when the solar peak is, when the wind peak is, when the loads peak, the customer's loads peak. Energy efficiency helps smooth all that out once you have sufficient storage. At the customer level, the energy efficiency is a bill reducer, number one, because we bill in terms of kWh, and I don't see that changing. We do have time of use as well. And when you have storage, that's another strategy for customers, the larger customers that are on time of use rates, to mitigate their energy bills, because they can store the power and then use it at certain times that might otherwise be peak TOU rates. So that's a big benefit. And finally, I would just say that we're all in it together. And it's an all of the above strategy. The utility is doing things, we're doing things at the utility scale on both renewable generation as well as the storage side, and customers are doing it on the distributed energy resource scale, which is critically important to us, because it's not just generating the renewables and having the storage. We run a grid, a distribution grid, and it has localized hotspots of congestion that can trip blackouts that are not citywide. It's not a wildfire took down path 14, one of the big out of area transmission lines. It could be one circuit, one part of the city. And so just customers investing in distributed energy resources, which is energy efficiency, demand response, storage, and localized solar generation, that can help us mitigate those very localized impacts as well.
Yeah, and kind of thinking back to the switch from work from home model, where everyone kind of just like came back and like switched to the cloud, and all the data that's being used now as part of that resiliency, also kind of forecasting or leaving pockets open for hopefully we don't have another pandemic, but kind of that anticipation, that agility, remaining agile.
Right. And so efficiency really, to maybe rephrase that or condense, really helps to optimize those investments in distributed energy resources, in the storage and generation, the more efficient we are, the more we can reduce the loads, the larger percentages we can cover, right? Or the longer we can go if there is some sort of a curtailment or a blackout.
Yep. Yeah, and this is a great segue actually to Aaron. I'll kind of add this question in. It looks like you are going to respond to the past anyway, so we can maybe combine the two. But how do you see buildings factoring into this definition of resiliency? Seismic, multifamily, retrofits, like especially with people spending more time at home now. You know, and as you mentioned earlier, like there are cheap ways and expensive, or I shouldn't say cheap, but less costly ways and more expensive ways to become more efficient. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, for sure. I love David Jaco talking about energy storage. That I think is it is really a good example of how we can kill two birds with one stone. Oftentimes, as you mentioned, when there are shocks or stresses, and if you have the ability to have local power, whether it's through solar or through storage, then if there is a disruption somewhere, your ability to continue doing business or continue critical functions by way of your stored energy or by way of generating electricity yourself is really helpful. Even though you may have put the system in place to be more efficient and to shave off some of your peak costs, the ability to then use that system to be more resilient and to be able to protect your customers and your loved ones is an efficient way to address a number of challenges. At the same time, as you mentioned, people are at home right now, and I know we're going to get into COVID a little bit later, but buildings have taken different roles these days, right? Your home is now, at least my home, I assume that many of yours is too. My home is my office now. My home is my children's school. In many instances, homes can be your doctor's office, and so finding ways to utilize buildings differently is a part of this discussion, and where we're talking about being resilient and sustainable, not only in your business place but at home, because those two things have become kind of interchangeable these days.
Yeah. We are coming up to 45 of the hour, and I wanted to see, if we wanted to transition to Q&As at this point or continue this conversation.
Great. I think it's a good point to shift to Q&A. I see a lot coming through the chat. So Bethany, would you like to start working our way through some of those questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. So one of the questions that we had was how, have any developers been able to show the financial payoff of GRESB reporting? Potentially answering this as a follow-up to Dave's comment David, I should say, on his comment on reducing insurance premiums.
Well, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about tying those two things together. I saw the question come in, and the best way to think about GRESB, what it is, it's a series of best practices that are used globally. And you do this in a wash, rinse, repeat annual basis that puts you on a pathway to continuous improvement. So if you're a developer, what the GRESB developer component of the assessment asks are things that are really germane to you and how you're operating your company. So I observed that a lot of folks have what I'd like to call random acts of sustainability that are happening within their portfolio. And once you can put a wrapper around that, it gets back to how we started our conversation today, which is it's a language, it's a communication. And what you're trying to do is communicate both internally as to what the expectations are of the organization, right? We want to be a great development company. We want to build the best buildings that we can. And you want to communicate that externally to various stakeholders. We've got some folks here that are part of government, part of utilities, right? Those are stakeholders in the project. You also have your financial backers, if you will. So, all of these things are diffused. And by going through the GRESB assessment, it really helps organizations, think about these issues, do it systematically, and approach, basically make progress going forward. So I know that that's not perhaps a satisfying question. We're looking for a stimulus response. I did this, therefore I received that. And it's not that simple. So, the cost of doing GRESB is really not that much. And I mean, it's 4,000 euros. So for 4,000 euros, if somebody wins a deal as a result of it, or brings in some cash from a financial backer, I'm pretty confident that the payoff is strong.
Also just add that my understanding is that having a sustainable or resilient building is also a selling point, right? If you own a building and you're trying to attract tenants, that's really become very popular, that companies are trying to be more responsible and trying to be a safer place. So if you can say that you've satisfied these requirements and you reach a certain level of sustainability or resilience, that's really attractive to people who you want to attract to do business there, or people you want to attract to work there.
Well, that's an interesting point. And just to quickly pile on this, right? So there's the confluence of building, right? And so that, I saw the question and I inferred it as a building label question, right? What's the benefit of getting Energy Star or LEED or BREEAM or whatever, Green Point rated, right? And GRESB is a portfolio level assessment. It's all about the company. It's all about who we are together and what we're trying to accomplish in an economic construct, in a societal construct, community, right? So there's that nuance that I think is very important to recognize with a question like that.
Yeah, and I think just to pick up on that, and this notion of convergence, I mean, I think we are seeing from our vantage point, we work with a lot of different owners. It's kind of getting to that point of, hey, you should be part of GRESB. Why aren't you? That there's enough kind of gravitational pull that's now been created that that's becoming almost a prerequisite. It sounds like from what I'm hearing.
Well, ESG has certainly become a topic high of mind. It's, I'd like to say that we traffic in structured non-financial data. So that means consumption. We've talked about that here. We've talked about best practices. And so, yeah, if you want to be a good, solid company, not even just a leading company anymore, but you want to understand what the leading companies are doing, then a framework like GRESB is an appropriate way to go.
Mm-hmm.
Tying it back to marketing too, I do think that brand integrity and, brand purpose and actually doing what you say is going to be increasingly important as more millennials kind of come into the decision maker roles. So I think like being certified by GRESB is kind of like one of those things where it's like you are walking the walk.
I may make one other point. So we've spent a decade really sort of knitting together a data ecosystem to get at this question: can you acquire the consumption data for a portfolio? Obviously, that trickles down to the assets. You have to roll that up into a portfolio. Why do we do that? Well, as we're looking ahead, the conversation is shifting very rapidly to all about carbon. And I know that we're having a difficulty pricing it, whether it's in our country or other places around the globe. It doesn't matter. People are going to be counting it. So some things have happened very recently. So in Europe, in the EU, they've passed the SFDR, Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation. And this applies to any investment bank, to any pension plan, whether or not you've marketed a fund or a financial product to green, you've got some metrics that the regulators over in the EU are asking. Okay, well, I'm in LA, so what? It's likely that somewhere in the capital stack is an EU fund or firm, right? The Netherlands is a really small country with an awful lot of money. They have to put that money to work, and a lot of it comes here. So the hunt for metrics, particularly carbon metrics, is high on the agenda going forward. TCFD is another acronym, Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. That's coming out of the UK. Again, hunt for metrics. So that will define what the next sort of decade ahead looks like. And if you're a developer, if you are a property owner, people are going to come knocking on your door looking for energy, water, waste. How are you doing on resilience? All of these issues are right front and center, not just about the financials, because people are looking for their return on their financials, and it's return and impact. Let's talk about those metrics and what those are.
So another question sort of related to that we had come in here is, the work of institutional owners is important, right? But it's also critical that we get that other 98% on board to move the needle. How can cities and your organizations best support that?
Not sure who should take a swing at that one. I think, I can try to speak to that, because part of the work we do is helping the city with implementing its existing buildings energy and water efficiency ordinance, and that's really the purpose of that ordinance is to kind of bring up the floor, right? To bring those class B and C and the smaller, mom and pops into the conversation, and try to, as Dan was saying, create some structure around that, and connect people with incentives and information to help them move on that. And I think that needs to be done in a really thoughtful way. Having been doing this here in LA for over a decade now, I think the policy piece was what was missing. So having that there has been helpful in my experience interacting with owners, whether they be institutional or the class B and C customers, to have a date by which, right, and metrics that need to be hit by that date, as we all work to clarify definitions and approaches and ways forward. So I think that's probably where that question was headed. I was just on a call this morning with a group called the American Cities Climate Challenge, which is funded by a group of philanthropic organizations, includes Bloomberg and others. And I can say there's a massive trend, a mega trend with support behind it for more cities to enact similar or even further, more ambitious legislation. And I think it's important. I see it as part of our role to create a bridge to help foster a dialogue between commercial real estate, whether that's Class A or Class B or C, and City Hall, right? So that this can be a thoughtful discussion, that we don't get stuck with kind of a chicken and egg type of issue. And so I think we have an exciting opportunity, here in LA to do that. And I see that playing out in lots of other markets right now. I think there were 30 other cities on that call just this morning.
And I'll say from a city perspective, there is my boss and myself included, but my boss is really a cheerleader for the city to lead and to set an example. And there's something exciting about Los Angeles setting an example. I mean, the work that the Department of Water and Power is doing towards energy efficiency and renewable energy is a model that other cities, not only in this country, but around the world, are looking at. And that will take, as David said, it'll take not only utility grade type of activity, but also community grade and individual grade. And so I think our role, and part of that is to support those sorts of things. But at the same time, all of the panelists here have connections to counterparts around the city, around the region, around the country, and around the world. So not only can we share what Los Angeles is doing to help other cities and countries solve these problems, but these networks also help us bring back solutions that we see in other places that might help us address our challenges.
Yeah, I can chime in a little bit from the utility perspective on this as well, and I'll go back to the Texas example. The reason the Texas utilities did not winterize their power plants, and that was what happened when the cold snap hit. They couldn't operate the gas power plants because everything froze and pipes burst because they never bothered to winterize it. Their deregulated model, it's all the cheapest kWh, the cheapest energy possible. So for one utility to invest in winterization means they have to pass those costs along, and it might only be one or 2 cents a kilowatt hour, but that makes them non-competitive. So it comes down to, you have to balance the markets with a level playing field in terms of a reasonable level of regulation. And I think if you looked at the Texas utilities and you told them, we're going to impose, the state of Texas is going to impose a resiliency requirement, weatherization, and you can pass it along to your customers, and it specifies exactly what it is, they'd probably be supportive if they're not having to compete with each other to the penny, because it becomes a level playing field. And we do this all the time locally when we engage building owners, property managers, property owners, when we're talking about things like the benchmarking ordinance. We did a lot of outreach. The mayor's office, we headed that up, did a great job. And, they were on board because they looked at each other and said, hey, I'll be subject to it, but so will you, we'll figure it out, but it's a level playing field. And that's the key to mitigating the risks if you just have it all be market driven.
Mm-hmm.
If I may.
Thank you. We have.
Example, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Texas example.
Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, go ahead, Bethany, please. Yep. Okay, so I was on a panel last week, and the Texas example really hit home that when an apartment, and this was an apartment example, when an apartment tenant doesn't have lights, doesn't have water, who's at fault? The property manager, right? Mm. Not the utilities problem, it's the property manager's problem. So that gets all back to resilience. And so resilience is, what's happening is, where does the problem lie? How do you deal with it? Is it the utility? Is it do we need battery storage distributed on the properties? Could be, right? So it drives an interesting conversation, but in that acute moment, it really, when the humans are concerned and whatnot, then it's not the utility's out and it's the property manager that's in. And it's really changed some mindsets as to how we're thinking about this as an industry. Right. Sorry about that, Bethany, go for it.
You know what, Dan, I think that's a great place to end, trying to keep on time. I've got a couple of wrap up slides, and I think you really brought home, Madhavi's initial point about the sort of individual or the personal notion of resilience and how this all goes from infrastructure down to when the power goes out, it's the property manager and that interaction that ends up happening. So thank you all for the discussion. This was fantastic. And I'm sorry we're not able to get through all the questions today. We'll try to capture those and do our best to address them in the recap, which will be going out as usual on Friday. So I want to thank all of our panelists as we head into the conclusion here. I want to do a quick promo for the Better Buildings, Better Plants Summit, which will be taking place May 17th through 20th. It's free. The program has been announced. There's some really great content, a lot on this theme, of course, as well as any other sort of slice or vertical that you could want to deep dive on. There will be roundtables on the Low Carbon Leaders pilot project, which I'm very excited about. We're kicking off here. I've been talking a lot about that the last few months. And that's what will be the topic of our May webinar, a discussion with some of our early participants around how they're going about that. How are we charting out those real world pathways to zero, right? Continuing on this theme with LA 100 coming out. And then, tentatively keep your eyes peeled. August, we'll be doing our 9th annual, I can't believe it's the 9th annual, Building Technology Showcase. We're partnering with GSA, which is the government's landlord on this. They have a phenomenal technology vetting platform that we are working with them to leverage into benefit for commercial real estate. So some fun stuff coming up. And I mentioned other webinar topics. There's the link to the DOE Better Buildings Summit. So I'd encourage folks to check that out. You don't have to do the whole 3-day thing, but there may be some sessions in there that you'll find really, really valuable. It's a great group that they have curated. And so a couple of key takeaways. I won't read the whole thing. Join GRESB if you're not already part of it. That is the framework. They're providing that structured non-financial data to the capital markets, which are more and more so looking for that. And if you have questions, Dan is very accessible, and we're happy to answer any questions too. We're pretty familiar with that program as a stepping stone. Set a science-based target. We started to talk about the idea of greenwashing and how third-party labels or frameworks like GRESB or like LEED at the asset level help to get at some of that. With this sort of barrage of zero net carbon by whatever the date is claims coming out, the next question is, okay, under that, is there a science-based target, or are you just pulling numbers out of the air? Do you actually have a way to get there? And there is an organization called Science-Based Targets, where some of the best climate scientists of every relevant discipline can actually review your plan and sign off on it. And they have a cohort that you can also join as a corporation or a real estate company that says, hey, we have a real target that's been checked by a third party. And so our pathway is science-based. LA's targets as laid out in the Sustainable City Plan are science-based targets. I really encourage folks to check that out. I hope we can get a webinar going with them as well. And if you're not already, get involved with us. So I hope you see that we can be a nice conduit for you to information and resources that will help you execute on your ESG priorities, and take advantage of other resources at the federal and other levels as well. So thank you all. I leave you again with this beautiful quote. We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. So thank you all for joining us today. Thank you especially to our panelists and Madhavi, fantastic job moderating. Thank you all and have a great afternoon. Take care.